Hi, I'm Joe Wahlberg, and this is Testing, an Ethical Dilemma. Chapter 1, The Neighborhood School. Alessandra Ramirez didn't know that she was poor. She knew that there were rich girls and houses across the city, but Abuela always said that she loved this home, and she would never move to a new one. Alessandra figured that the neighborhood was her family's home for 3 generations, and it was theirs. She lived by the church. Her church was the parish school, St. Stephen's Catholic Church. It was her home, and she didn't know about economicas. They were not her problems. Her problem was the 4th grade Iowa assessment test. Mrs. Zervik knew that Alessandra was poor. She knew that all the kids at St. Stephen's School were poor. The neighborhood had always welcomed immigrant families, first the Italians, then the Croatians, and now the immigrants from Mexico. It had been a mostly Mexican neighborhood since the 1980s. Ann Zervik started teaching at St. Steve's right about that time. She'd seen the neighborhood be rich with the life of young families and suffer from the low wages of house painters and grill cooks. The families worked hard. They tried to be good to their kids and tried to be good for their kids. But all the adults knew that it was still a poor neighborhood. It was pretty hard. Iowa assessment testing started on Monday, March 30th. Why do they test in March? Ann thought. It was just a few days after spring break, and even the good students were antsy in March. This was just too much. In 42 years of teaching, Mrs. Zervik had every opinion on the Iowa assessments. When she was a young teacher, the Iowa Basics, as it was known then, was everything. St. Steve's was one of the jewels of the district back then, posting some of the highest scores in the diocese, especially for an urban school. But that was then, and these kids really struggled now. Ann wasn't sure why they were even still using the Iowa assessment anymore. Most of the other schools in the diocese switched to map testing years ago, and they'd switched again to iReady or IXL or Renaissance Star. It's probably because none of the other schools use Iowa anymore, so they can't compare us to St. John Vianney Academy or whatever rich suburban school is the trendy favorite these days, thought Ann. Mr. Campbell tries to hide us. He's such a coward. I remember when this school had a real leader, someone who really wanted to help these kids. Now we have to do it all. Mr. Campbell had laid off the lunchroom aides. When the librarian retired, Mr. Campbell asked the counselor to manage the books. When the nurse retired, he had Mari, the secretary, be the nurse, taking temperatures and metering out the acetaminophen and calling grandmothers to come get their sick grandchildren from school. Ann was used to helping. It's why she taught 1st grade for 25 years before moving into 4th grade. She liked how the 1st graders needed her. She knew she could make a difference, but she'd been teaching 4th grade for the last 17 years. The principal then, was it Mrs. O'Shaughnessy or was it Mrs. O'Brien? Ann couldn't remember. St. Stephen's changed principals every few years. It was probably Mrs. O'Brien who asked her to switch to 4th grade. She said it was easier to hire a 1st grade teacher because everyone who just graduated college wanted to teach 1st grade. 4th grade teachers were harder to find. Ann Zervik still had plenty of help to give. 4th graders weren't that different. They knew how to tie their shoes in 4th grade, at least passably, but they were taking big steps at school. She liked how 4th grade was the transition from learn to read into read to learn. Mrs. Zervik liked teaching handwriting. Is there anything harder than reading the unsteady cursive of a 10-year-old? Handwriting is tactile, and kids needed to feel the scratch of the pencil lead across a paper. There were still things in a world that couldn't be typed. It wouldn't be typed, and handwriting was a forever skill. 4th graders are still proud to show off their work in the hallway, too. To see a child's attempt to write haiku poetry or label the phases of the water cycle. 4th graders enjoyed seeing the projects hung up in the tack strip galleries of the brick halls. Sometimes she would secretly erase some of the stray marks off the water cycle labels, clean them up a little bit. Other students wouldn't laugh at the out-of-place pencil marks. They'd only see the dark blue colored oceans and the gray clouds and condensation written in heavy pencil markings. That was helping too. Alessandra liked taking the Iowa assessment, to be honest. She liked to color in the green circles. It was so satisfying to pencil in around the inside of the circle. Sometimes she closed in the circle with a spirally swirl, and sometimes she shaded back and forth. Sometimes she tried to fill in the circle so darkly that you couldn't see if it was a swirl or back and forth shading. It was just total blackness. Taking the test was actually kind of fun, especially the math section. Math was easy, and she liked to go real fast through that part. She liked to finish first and look around and see that she was the first one finished. Then she could go back and make all her circle marks even darker. This was fun. Iowa assessments seemed confusing this year. Mrs. Servick was really confusing. Sometimes she said the tests didn't matter for the grade card and that her classmates shouldn't worry. But then later, Mrs. Servick said the Iowa assessments were important to the school and they needed to try her best. Alessandra couldn't tell if she needed to be worried or not. Were they going to be harder this year? Fourth grade hadn't seemed much harder to her, but maybe it was harder in Iowa where they made the tests. It was all very confusing. That night at dinner, Alessandra's grandmother noticed that Alessandra was not eating her food. ¿Qué te preocupa, nieta mía? Nada, abuela. I'm okay. Then after a minute, she went on. Abuela, are the Iowa assessments harder in fourth grade? I don't know, mija. I just know that you should eat your food. Mr. Campbell had been nervous all week, but he was trying not to show it to the teachers. The parish board had made it clear that his time at St. Stephen's had not been going well. The Foundation for Catholic Schools had been making substantial donations to St. Stephen's for the last 15 years. They were covering almost 100% of the tuition for almost 100% of the families of the school. But test scores have been dropping year after year for all 5 years that Mr. Campbell had been principal, and the parish board was worried that the Foundation for Catholic Schools was going to spend their money elsewhere. Before coming to St. Stephen's, Tim Campbell was the athletic director of West Tree Forest High, a medium-sized public high school in the exurbs of the city. He was a good AD. The coaches he hired were good with kids, and they even won a state championship with girls basketball and another in wrestling. But the late nights of the basketball season and all the public scrutiny about football was more than he wanted to deal with after a while. He just wanted to work with teachers and coaches and stay off the game of the week business that was just there to pump up a TV station's social media page. Being a principal was way harder than he expected. He thought he was going to roll into a small school and glide hand with some teachers and then see the same kind of success at the school as he did as an athletic director. He didn't expect the prickly politics of a small urban school. There were some longtime teachers who he thought had gotten stale in the classroom, and some young teachers all fired up with the let's change the world excitement of their first job at a college. There weren't any mid-career teachers at St. Steve's. Young teachers either burned out on the job and quit after 2 years, or jumped to higher-paying jobs in public education. The older teachers and the young teachers didn't get along either. Veterans like Anne thought the young teachers were so focused on the curriculum that they treated students like little robots. Becca Coronado was one such teacher. Becca was in her second year of teaching third grade. She was always talking about data-driven decision-making and 21st century skills for the jobs of the future. It's not like Anne didn't agree with the data or the future, but she thought it ignored the kind of help that kids most need when they're young. What kind of 10-year-old is training for a job of the future? They can barely write their letters in cursive. Miss Coronado thought Ann Servick was spending too much time on useless handwriting and not enough time on STEM subjects. Miss Coronado had thought that students like Alessandra had a lot of promise, a smart Latinx girl who loved math. That's the kind of student she lived for. Mr. Campbell hadn't had to manage a budget like this before either. There was only one section in most grades, but also interventionists and PE teachers and counselors. There wasn't enough money to buy books, let alone employ a librarian. And the building wasn't aging well. The roof leaked, the air conditioning didn't work, and some middle school boy broke a urinal. That needed to be replaced. Urinals are more expensive than he thought. He hadn't had to deal with a pastor as his boss. Father Jim didn't know anything about education. He left most of the oversight of the school to a volunteer board that he appointed to monitor the school. The board was hard too. It was made up of a mix of young families of the parish, some longtime parishioners who had kids at the school decades ago, and a couple of rich businessmen who grew up in the parish before moving to a rich subdivision on the west side of town. They didn't know what it was like to run a school. They were the ones who insisted on using the Iowa assessment, which they still called the Iowa Basics, because it's an assessment they understood. It's so expensive, he complained. It's even more than map testing, and that's so expensive too. Just switch to iReady. They use it at Vianney. If it's good enough for Vianney, it's got to be good enough for us. No, St. Steve's uses the Iowa Basics, he was told by Barbara Pokropsky, the chairwoman of the board. So that's what they used. His hands were tied. They were going to use the last pencil and bubble sheet test on the market, and that's just the way it is. At least it was an assessment the teachers knew how to administer without any problems. That part went smoothly. Chapter 2, Test Day. On Monday, Mrs. Servick's class went to all-school mass in the morning. All the classes went to Mass on Mondays. Once the teachers had completed their morning attendance and once Mr. Campbell had gotten on the intercom to read the school prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance, all the kids put on their jackets and lined up to cross the parking lot into the church for Mass. This week, the 7th graders did the readings. Alessandra was impressed by the way that 7th grade boy read the first reading at Mass. He was a really good reader. I bet he's good at the IO assessments, she thought. The 7th graders are probably Mr. Campbell's favorite class. She wondered if she was better at math than that boy when he was in the 4th grade. She wondered if Mrs. Cervic told him that the test didn't matter for the grade card. After Mass was science, and then handwriting practice, and then the library. After library was lunch. Mondays were Alessandra's favorite day. Usually, Mrs. Cervic did math after lunch, but not today. It was IO assessment day. Lunch was rib sandwiches, her favorite, with green beans. They were okay. And fruit cocktail. Gross. The boys always wanted to trade their green beans for a fruit cocktail, but Alessandra would just give away her fruit cocktail. She didn't care about green beans enough. And since there weren't any lunch aides anymore, Anne had working lunch on Monday, helping out the 1st graders open their milk cartons and passing out extra napkins for the students who messily ate their rib sandwiches. Kindergarten through 4th grade ate in the first shift, and 5th through 8th had the second lunch. Truth be told, Mrs. Cervic didn't mind lunch duty once a week, but she knew it still shouldn't be her. There should be a lunchroom aide instead. But she helped where she could, got all the kids to clear their trays, and then gave the long lunchroom tables a quick wipe down while the students stacked their trays and lined up to go back to class. The middle schoolers were already lined up outside the door, eagerly waiting for lunch. Rib sandwiches were their favorite, too. When 4th grade got back to the room, Mrs. Cervic passed out the green bubble sheets and began to read the instructions. Enter your name in the green boxes at the top left of the page. 1 letter in each box. Please use capital letters. Mrs. Cervic, should we write in cursive? Alessandra asked. No, printing is best for this. Alessandra began to color in the circles under each letter. She loved it. This was her favorite thing to do, after all. She focused on the test, vocabulary, reading, language. All of them went well. Last was math, and she looked forward to it. She looked around the room. Santiago was acting crazy. He always acted crazy on test days. He was dancing in his seat and making faces. Mrs. Cervic tried to calm him down. She kept telling him to sit still and be quiet. She really wanted Santiago to be quiet. This test was important to Mr. Campbell. He'd been telling the teachers at their weekly staff meetings to make a good testing environment this year. She'd had some suspicion that something was on the line. She'd not really talked about the Iowa assessments so much before this spring. Mrs. Cervic and Mr. Campbell didn't really get along, but she thought they understood each other, and she understood that this was suddenly important. Something was up. Mrs. Cervic liked Santiago a lot, but knew that he was not a strong student. She noticed that he showed signs of ADHD, but it was always untreated. It showed up in his behavior, and it affected the way he turned in his homework. His homework was always a mess. She spent extra time cleaning up his water cycle poster, erasing the stray marks, redrawing some of the lines that were a little off. She didn't think Santiago would mind. In fact, he seemed to like the help and have it be just a little more perfect. Santiago didn't get a lot of school support from his parents. In truth, his dad was also a little crazy in school. Mrs. Cervic remembered having Santiago's father in class when she was still a young teacher. She'd been teaching long enough to have the next generation of students. Santiago's father acted the same way that his son does now. We didn't call it ADHD back then. We just called it acting out. But he's his father's son for sure, Mrs. Cervic smiled, just thinking about it. Good kids, she thought. Kind of a mess, but good kids. Alessandra raced through the math test. She knew there were some she got wrong, but she made her best guess and moved on. She finished math with 4 minutes remaining on the test. Santiago wasn't even halfway finished. He'd broken his pencil point twice and took a long time sharpening it. Alessandra smiled and went back to darken the circles with pride. At the end of the test, she passed in the answer packet, then passed in the question book. She knew that she would never know which question she got right or wrong, but she also knew that her abuela would be proud of her. At conferences, Mrs. Cervic would tell abuela that she was a smart student. She just knew it. After the Iowa assessment, it was recess time. 4th grade and 3rd grade shared a recess period, and the teachers traded off supervision duty during that time. Miss Coronado brought her class down the hall and lined them up outside of Miss Cervic's room to take both classes to play in the parking lot. Anne was going to stay behind and organize the Iowa assessment booklets. As the last student left the room, she closed the door to work without interruption for 20 minutes. Right at the top of the pile was Santiago's booklet. It was such a mess. Most of the book was filled out, but the corner of the second page was wrinkled. She could see where Santiago broke his pencil both times. There were scratches on the page, and the bubbles turned from light to dark where the pencils were freshly sharpened. Such a mess, she thought to herself with a smile. And she picked up the white rubber pencil eraser and began to clean up the pages for the Scantron. That's when Mr. Campbell and Father Jim opened the door. They'd been worrying about the assessments all day, and they'd been waiting to see fourth grade on the playground before they came in to check on how it went. When those two men burst in the room, Mr. Campbell's mouth dropped. There was a veteran teacher, one that always had him a little on edge because he knew that she didn't like him, appearing to erase and rewrite answers in the standardized test booklet. Chapter 3, Tampering. "Anne, what's going on here?" Mr. Campbell stammered. "Oh, just getting these booklets cleaned up for the scanner," she replied. Father Jim looked nervous and confused. Once he saw the books and the erasers and the teacher, he panicked and looked for a way out of a hard conversation. "Tim, I'm gonna step out for a minute. I want to look at a thing down the hall." And then he walked out of the room backwards and shuffled away quickly. "Anne, are you changing those student answers? These tests are important. We can't afford to have someone think we're tampering with them," Mr. Campbell said haltingly. "No, of course not," Miss Cervic replied. But there was all the evidence he needed. Anne Cervic erasing and remarking student books. Anne Cervic, who complained about him, questioned his leadership behind his back, and who made it clear at staff meetings that she wished she wasn't teaching fourth grade. And he caught her, altering tests. Father Jim had seen it too. Why did he just leave like that? What a coward. It's hard to work without a real leader, he thought to himself. Anne looked at Mr. Campbell blankly for a moment. Then it dawned on her. Tampering was exactly what she was doing. And in an instant, everything flashed through her mind. If this got out, the rumors would spread like wildfire, even if they weren't true. People would say that she was cheating as a teacher, that the school was cheating at the tests. Becca Coronado would explode about unreliable data, and she would get even more forceful about her opinions. Anne thought that Campbell would probably have to fire her, and all the families would demand to know why, and Anne's reputation would be ruined, and so close to retirement. Would she even be able to keep her retirement account or her pension? Would Mr. Campbell lose his job? He might get accused of bad test security. She didn't like working for Mr. Campbell, but she didn't want him to get fired. No one wants someone else to get fired. She didn't want to get fired. What if the foundation gave up on St. Stephen's? There was no way that kids like Santiago or Alessandra could go to some other Catholic school. They couldn't afford the tuition somewhere else. This was a disaster. Tim Campbell froze. He'd never considered that Anne Cervic would be dishonest, but here it was. She was altering tests right in front of his eyes. A veteran teacher, someone with a long reputation of working with kids. Her students adored her. What to do? This was a dilemma. Chapter 4, Fact-Finding. "Okay, tell me what's up," Mr. Campbell said as he sat down next to Miss Cervic's desk. He needed to get more information about what he saw. I was just trying to help. Santiago doesn't turn in very neat work. These are pencil marks everywhere, and some of the circles aren't even filled in all the way. I'm not changing any answers. Oh my goodness, I promise I'm not changing anything. It's just such a mess. I was trying to help," pleaded Mrs. Cervic. "Okay, let's get to the bottom of this. How much longer until the students come back from recess?" asked the principal. He didn't think she was being dishonest or cheating, but still, she was altering student work. Even if she had good intentions, he thought he needed to be careful about what happened next. "Recess is 20 minutes. They've been out for," she checked her watch, 15 minutes. They'll line up in about 5 minutes to come inside." Mr. Campbell checked his watch. It was 2:35, and school let out at 3:10. There would be 30 minutes left to school when the students came back. Not really long enough to call an emergency sub, but too long with a room full of 10-year-olds to have nothing to do. "Okay, I'm going to take all the answer sheets and the test booklets back to my office. I need to read through the proctor manual very carefully. What are you teaching when they come back inside? Our last subject today is social studies. They're working on drawing neighborhood maps of their street, Mrs. Cervix said. Okay, let's finish the day like normal. It may take a while to get to the bottom of this. I'm going to have front door duty during dismissal. Do you have parking lot duty today? Mr. Kemble asked. Yes, replied Anne quietly. Okay, as soon as you get the cars cleared, let's meet in the office. I don't know what's going to happen yet, but we have a problem on our hands. I need to take this pretty seriously, Anne, but I'm not going to make moves until I read the manual. Give the kids a good remainder of the school day. Mr. Campbell, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do anything wrong. Anne started to tear up a little. I don't know if I could finish today. I don't know. And her voice trailed off. And we can ask Mrs. Williams, the counselor, if your students can go to the library, if that's better. No, we've already had library. I'll pull it together. Maybe kind of a weak lesson, she replied. Okay, be your best. Let's meet after parking lot duty. Mr. Campbell dropped the packets on his desk and sat down with the Iowa Assessment Instruction Manual. As far as he could tell, all the protocols were followed correctly for distributing the materials and administering the tests. The testing times are quoted on the proctor sheet, lined up with the expectations, and all the packets seemed to be in order. But there it was on page 16 of the Test Security Manual. In the section labeled Violations of Test Security was number 7. It is violation to engage in any practice designed solely to raise student scores without actually improving underlying student achievement. This was the tampering clause. He thought back through his ethics class in graduate school. In Principalship II course, he learned about the ethic of justice. This was clearly a violation of testing procedures and damaged the data from the assessment. These assessments were important to the board, and anything that hurt their validity would be a problem for the stakeholders. They expected the assessments to show if the students at the school were making progress. If people couldn't trust the results of the test, then investing in the assessments was just a huge waste, and the dishonesty was something they just wouldn't tolerate. He also thought of the ethic of critique. Part of him wanted to lean into the parts of the critique that claimed that standardized tests reinforced power structures against students at his school. Those students who were absolutely learning at school but who didn't speak English at home, they didn't stand a fair chance on the Iowa assessment to begin with. But he knew that evidence of tampering would look like it benefited him, that it would be too hard to explain. Even if he didn't know about the tampering to begin with, and if the test scores indicated that students like Santiago were doing better than his work should have shown, did that mean that Santiago would miss out on some kinds of support he should be receiving? Mr. Campbell didn't want to think about that. He knew that Anne Cervix wanted the best for her students. He also thought about the ethic of care. This is probably what Mrs. Cervix's first approach would be with her students. This is probably what caused the situation in the first place. Still, he maybe thought that's what he should consider first. Mr. Campbell knew that Mrs. Cervix didn't like him, so any decision he made should probably just reinforce that it wasn't personal. Just as important, he had to care for the students in Miss Cervix's class. They should have their work evaluated fairly so they could get the education they deserve. He knew that he couldn't ignore the problem, that wasn't care, but he needed to think of Anne and the kids. Mari, the school secretary, opened his door with a gentle knock and stuck her head from behind it. Senor Campbell, I think you missed door duty. The children are all gone for the day, and Miss Anne is looking for you. Oh, gosh, you're right. I missed it. Please let Miss Cervix in, he replied. Hi, Anne. We've got quite a mess here. I'm so sorry, she burst out in sobs. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I was just trying to help. Mrs. Cervix's voice trailed off. Oh, I hate this. I didn't mean to. Anne, Tim interrupted firmly, and he changed his tone. I read the manual. This is a test security violation. I'll need to note it on the assessment security report. How many students' books had you altered when I walked in? It was just Santiago, nobody else. I promise I didn't change any answers. It was just erasing the extra marks. Okay, this doesn't sound like a worst-case scenario situation. I mean, it's not good, but I don't think it's a crisis. We will need to repair the harm, though. Oh, thank God, but how will I do that? Miss Cervix replied. I'm not sure yet. We'll put it on the security report that his book had been altered after he finished. It'll show an asterisk on his report, and Santiago's parents will see there was some kind of irregularity. They may ask us about it, said Mr. Campbell. Oh, there's no way they'll notice or ask, thought Anne. If they ask, we'll have to be honest. But if he didn't change any answers, I think we just have to trust the results of the test. The optical reader will have to score whatever it can read. Mr. Campbell paused and then said, No, I don't think that's going to work. I think we're going to need to retest fourth grade somehow. The board isn't going to like to see an asterisk either. The two talked for a few more minutes, and then each went home for the rest of the day. Then Tim Campbell had an idea. Chapter 5, A Way Forward. The next morning, he was on the phone with Barbara Pokropsky. Barbara, I want to talk about the Iowa assessments. We're administering the test this week, but we ran into a problem in the fourth grade class. One of the tests had a security problem, and we want a second test to corroborate the data. He tried to downplay the security problem and focus on remediation. What kind of problem, Tim? Mrs. Pokropsky asked. He didn't sneak it past her. One of the test books was altered after the student turned it in, he answered. He didn't elaborate any further. Mr. Campbell wasn't going to lie if she asked, but he wasn't going to volunteer any information. He couldn't cover for Ann Cervic, but he didn't see any advantage in outing her. Tim, I don't think we can afford a second test of the Iowa basics, Mrs. Pokropsky said. Money is tight at St. Steve's, you know. I'd like to use iReady as the second test. Something to double-check our work. Mr. Campbell, St. Steve's has always used the Iowa basics. We have over 50 years of scores. If we try a different test, how will we be able to compare your teachers to the past years? We'll still have data from the Iowa assessment, Ms. Pokropsky. This would just be a second test to see if the data looks correct. And we'd only do it for fourth grade, at least for this year. He immediately regretted saying that last sentence. Dr. McDonald, the principal at St. John Vianney Academy, has been using iReady for the last few years, and he's been very happy with the data coming out of Vianney. I think we should try it for fourth grade to see if it matches the Iowa scores. Vianney uses iReady? Well, that's good to know, but how will we pay for it? I'm not totally sure, to be honest. I think I could sneak a bit of money out of the payroll budget, but we'll probably need to ask the Foundation for Catholic Schools to help out with it, Campbell replied. Okay, let's do it. I think the Foundation will support it this time. I'll call them when we get off the phone. Go ahead and set it up. Tim Campbell breathed a sigh of relief, but he knew that everything wasn't over yet. And do you have lunchroom duty today? Mr. Campbell asked while fourth grade was lining up for their lunch break. No, Miss Coronado has lunchroom on Tuesdays, Miss Cervic replied. Okay, pop into my office after you take these scholars to lunch, he said loudly, trying to make it sound like he wasn't harboring bad news. Will do, Mr. Campbell, Anne replied, feigning enthusiasm. They both knew what each other was thinking. Sit down, Anne. I talked to the board this morning, and we're going to retest fourth grade. Oh, won't that be too expensive? I heard the Iowa assessment was a very expensive test for schools. Well, they're not cheap for sure, but we're going to try a different assessment in your class. Something that we can look at alongside our current tests. It'll still cost money, but once there's an irregularity report, I think we need a second set of results. You know, for data-driven decision-making, Mr. Campbell said. Ugh, data-driven decision-making, Anne thought in her head. She stopped herself from rolling her eyes. And there's one more thing. When we do the new test, we're going to try iReady. I want you to be out of the building that day. We expect to have it set up next week. I'm going to suspend you one day, that day, without pay, and administer the tests myself. I don't want to have to do this, Mrs. Cervic, but tampering with the test is a pretty serious problem, even if you didn't mean to hurt anyone. And I don't think we can just overlook it. Mr. Campbell knew it wasn't really good practice to suspend someone in the future for a problem. It would be better to do it immediately. But he thought he'd take a chance with a veteran teacher. He thought that one day's pay might also be the tiny payroll squeeze that he promised to Mrs. Pokropsky. I'll need to note it in your employee file with the diocese, but I think that's as far as this needs to go. Oh, Mr. Campbell, you know I wouldn't do something like this again. Let me administer the iReady test. I'll do it without pay. I just want to show that you can trust me. These kids can trust me. I just want to help. Whoa, he interrupted. Anne, you're a good teacher. You and I both know it. And a couple of generations of students know it, and I think we can move past this soon enough. And besides the record I need to make with HR, I don't think we need to dwell on it. He knew that Anne Cervic would dwell on it, but there wasn't much more he could do. He just had to be fair to everybody and move forward. He thought, that's the ethic of the profession. The end.